In the winter of 1916, a man promised to fill an empty reservoir in San Diego. No machines, no dam upgrades. He was going to make it rain. The city council laughed, then offered him $10,000 if he pulled it off. He climbed a wooden tower next to Lake Morena, mixed a batch of secret chemicals, and let them drift up into the sky. 4 days later, it started to rain. Then it didn't stop. It rained so hard that a dam downstream shattered, sent a wall of water 40 feet tall racing toward the ocean, and killed around 20 people. And when the rainmaker walked back into City Hall to collect his $10,000, the city refused to pay him a single cent, because paying him meant admitting he did it. And admitting he did it meant he owed them for the flood. Welcome to the strangest business on earth, where you can be worth a fortune for doing something nobody can prove you did. Let's start with the fantasy, because the fantasy is intoxicating. Imagine you could turn the sky on like a faucet. A farmer's crops are dying in a drought, and you fly a plane over a cloud, sprinkle a little dust, and rain falls on his field. Maybe a ski resort has no snow 3 weeks before the season, and you make it snow. Somewhere, a city's reservoir is running dry, and you refill it from thin air. Every government on Earth that has ever watched a harvest wither would line up to write you a check. You would be selling the one thing money has never been able to buy directly: weather. It sounds like a superpower with an invoice attached. And here's the part that will surprise you. It's real. This is not science fiction, and it's not a scam from 100 years ago. Right now, today, dozens of countries are spending real money to squeeze extra water out of the clouds, and the industry has a name that sounds almost boring: weather modification, the polite term for playing God with the sky. So, how much money are we talking about? Estimates for the global cloud seeding market are all over the map, from a few $100 million to well over $2 billion, depending on who's counting and what they choose to count. But every one of those numbers badly undersells what's actually happening, because the biggest players don't show up in a tidy market report. They're governments. Take China. According to the U.S. Government Accountability Office, China poured roughly $2 billion into weather modification in just 7 years, making it the largest program the world has ever seen. And they are not shy about the scale. Back in 2020, Beijing announced a plan to expand artificial rain and snow across 5.5 million square kilometers of the country. To put that in perspective, that's an area more than 1.5 times the size of India. 1.5 Indias blanketed by a program designed to change when and where it rains. By China's own numbers, over 5 years, their operations added roughly 167 billion tons of extra rain and snow, and their hail-busting missions cut crop damage by around $8.5 billion. Weather modification in China now reaches the skies over 68% of the country's major grain-growing land. Think about what that sentence means. Across more than 2/3 of the fields that feed a fifth of humanity, when the right clouds roll in, the rain is no longer entirely nature's decision. China isn't alone. The United Arab Emirates has been seeding clouds since the 1990s, throwing money at research to wring water out of a desert sky. Their scientists claim they can boost rainfall by as much as 30 to 35% under the right conditions. In the United States, western states run their own programs. Utah operates the largest ground-based cloud seeding network in the country, a web of remote generators fired up across entire mountain ranges to fatten the snowpack that feeds their rivers. Colorado, Wyoming, Idaho, all of them are in the game because in the dry West, a few extra inches of snow in the mountains is worth millions of dollars downstream in the summer. When you add it all up, more than 50 countries have run some form of weather modification. This is a global industry hiding in plain sight. Now, before you go all in and buy yourself a fleet of seeding planes, let's talk about how you'd actually do it. Because the mechanics are genuinely simple, and that simplicity is a huge part of the seduction. A cloud is full of water, tiny droplets floating, too small and too light to fall. For rain to happen, those droplets need something to grab onto. A speck of dust, a grain of ice, a nucleus. They cluster around it, get heavy, and drop. That's it. That's the whole trick behind a raindrop. Now, here's the one thing seeding cannot do. It cannot conjure water out of a clear blue sky. You need a cloud that's already stuffed with moisture but stubbornly refusing to let go. What seeding does is hand that cloud more of those specks to grab onto. You fly up or you fire a flare from the ground, and you release a substance whose crystal structure looks almost exactly like ice. Usually it's silver iodide. Sometimes it's just crushed dry ice. The cloud sees this fake ice. Water freezes onto it, the crystals grow heavy, and they fall. If it's cold enough, you get snow. If it melts on the way down, you get rain. You can deliver it 3 ways. Planes fly straight into the cloud and burn flares off the wingtips. Ground generators on mountainsides shoot the particles up on rising air currents. And the newest toys are drones, which a handful of programs are now testing to fly straight into a cloud and drop the material right where the conditions are best. The whole thing costs a fraction of building a dam or a desalination plant. A farmer facing a lost harvest will happily pay for a few plane runs if it might save the season. On paper, this is the perfect business. Cheap ingredients, desperate customers, and a product that falls out of the sky. So it's simple. It's cheap. Governments want it. It should be a gold mine. It is not. Here's the trap, and it's a beautiful one. You can seed a cloud and it can rain, and you still cannot prove you had anything to do with it, because clouds rain on their own. That's what clouds do. When the water falls on that farmer's field, there is no way, none, to know whether it fell because of your silver iodide, or whether it was going to fall anyway. There's no control group. You cannot run the same afternoon twice, once with seeding and once without, and compare. The one experiment that would settle it is the one experiment nature will never let you run. This is called the attribution problem, and it is the ghost that haunts every dollar in this entire industry. The most honest studies suggest cloud seeding might increase precipitation by around 10 to 15% under good conditions. Might. And even that modest number is fiercely argued over, because you are trying to measure a small nudge against the enormous, chaotic background noise of the weather itself. It's like claiming you made a river flow faster by spitting in it. Maybe you did. Prove it. The whole history of this field is littered with the wreckage of people who couldn't. Consider the biggest attempt of them all. For 20 years, from 1962 to 1983, the United States government ran a program called Project Stormfury. The dream was staggering. They didn't want to make it rain. They wanted to break a hurricane, fly into a monster storm, seed it with silver iodide, and rob it of its power before it hit the coast. They seeded several Atlantic hurricanes, and at first it looked like it worked. Storms got weaker after seeding. Victory, right? Then someone checked the boring, unseeded hurricanes. And it turned out those storms changed in exactly the same way, all on their own. The weakening couldn't be credited to the seeding at all. It was the attribution problem swallowing an entire 20-year program whole. Stormfury was quietly shut down, its grand promise dissolved into a shrug. So now put yourself back in the entrepreneur's chair. You are selling a product that, on its very best day, might add 10 or 15% more rain, that you can never prove worked at all to customers who are gambling on faith. How on earth do you run a business on that? The answer is uncomfortable, and it explains everything about why this industry looks the way it does. Rain isn't the thing you sell hope, wrapped in the language of science. And you hand a government official the ability to stand in front of angry, thirsty farmers and say, "We are doing everything we can." The seeding might add 10%, but the political cover it provides is worth 100%. That's the real product, not water. Deniable action against a drought. And if you think that's cynical, wait until you hear where this technology actually came from. Because it wasn't built to help farmers. It was built by a light bulb company, and it nearly ended in a courtroom. The year is 1946. At the General Electric Research Labs in upstate New York, a scientist named Vincent Schaefer is fiddling with a freezer, trying to make clouds inside a chilled box. On a hot day, he drops a chunk of dry ice into the freezer to cool it down, and the whole box erupts in a shimmer of tiny ice crystals. He'd done it by accident. He'd made snow indoors. A colleague named Bernard Vonnegut, whose brother Kurt would later become one of America's most famous novelists, figured out that silver iodide worked even better. And overseeing it all was Irving Langmuir, a Nobel Prize winner who became absolutely convinced that humanity was on the verge of controlling the weather itself. They were so confident that in October of 1947, they talked the military into a wild experiment. Find a hurricane out at sea, one drifting harmlessly away from land, and seed it. So an Air Force plane flew over a hurricane off the coast of Florida and dumped about 80 kilograms of dry ice into the storm. Then everyone watched to see what would happen. What happened was a nightmare. The hurricane, which had been heading calmly out into the open Atlantic, suddenly swung almost 130 degrees to the west, turned around, and slammed directly into Savannah, Georgia. It caused around $2 million in damage, and the people of Georgia wanted someone to blame. And Langmuir, in a spectacular own goal, publicly announced that he was 99% sure the seeding had caused the storm to turn. And that was the trap all over again. Nobody could actually prove the dry ice had steered that hurricane. But the moment a Nobel laureate said it out loud, nobody could prove it hadn't either. General Electric's lawyers went pale. Here was the head of their laboratory on the record, taking credit for steering a hurricane into an American city. The lawsuits, if they landed, could be catastrophic. GE frantically pulled back from the whole thing, and the young science of weather control was tarred for decades by the memory of that runaway storm. That is the founding moment of this industry. Not a triumphant rescue of a dying crop, a hurricane, a wrecked city, and a company sprinting away from liability. But governments don't forget a tool that powerful, especially not a tool that can be hidden. And that brings us to the darkest chapter, the one they tried very hard to keep secret. During the Vietnam War, the United States ran a classified operation with the almost comic codename Operation Popeye. The mission was not to help anyone. It was to weaponize the rain. American planes secretly seeded the clouds over the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the supply route the North Vietnamese used to move troops and equipment. The goal was to extend the monsoon season, to make it rain and rain and rain until the roads turned to mud and the trucks bogged down and the whole supply line drowned in the mire. It ran for years. In the test phase alone, they reported that 82% of the clouds they seeded produced rain. The program was so secret that the Secretary of Defense flatly denied to Congress that any such thing even existed while it was actively being run, allegedly with the blessing of Henry Kissinger and the CIA. When journalists finally dragged it into the light, the outrage was immediate. The idea that a nation would turn the weather itself into a weapon of war horrified the world. It fed straight into an international treaty, in force by 1978, that banned turning the environment itself into a weapon of war when the damage would be widespread, long-lasting, or severe. Making it rain had officially become something the world felt it needed to put on a leash. And that leads us to the part that makes this business almost impossible. The blame problem. Remember the attribution ghost? The fact that you can never prove seeding caused the rain? It cuts both ways, and the second edge is far sharper than the first. Because while you can never prove you helped, the moment anything goes wrong, everyone is instantly, furiously certain that you're the cause. Look at what happened in Dubai in April of 2024. Historic, catastrophic flooding turned highways into rivers and drowned an airport. And within hours, before any scientist had looked at a single data point, the entire internet had decided it was cloud seeding. The UAE seeds clouds, the UAE flooded, therefore the UAE did it. Meteorologists explained over and over that it was a massive natural storm system, and that seeding could not come close to explaining a flood that size. Nobody wanted to hear it. The story was too perfect. Man plays God, God sends a flood. That's the reputation this industry carries. When the rain helps, you can't take credit. When the rain destroys, you can't dodge the blame. It gets even stranger, because rain is finite. And if you believe you can pull it down over your country, then your neighbor can start to believe you're stealing it from theirs. In 2018, a senior Iranian general publicly accused other nations of, and I'm being literal here, stealing Iran's clouds and snow, cloud theft, as a geopolitical grievance. Iran's own weather scientists quietly waved the accusation away, but the general had already said it in front of the cameras. Once you convince the world that a country can control the sky, you have handed every drought a villain. And the villain is always the guy with the seeding planes. There is no other business where doing your job can get you accused of robbing the heavens. So let's go back to where we started, to that man on the tower in San Diego, because his story is the entire industry compressed into one man's ruin. His name was Charles Hatfield. He wasn't a scientist. He was a sewing machine salesman with what he called a secret brew of 23 chemicals and an absolutely magnificent amount of confidence. He'd toured the drought-stricken West for years, setting up his towers, releasing his fumes, and collecting fees from desperate towns whenever rain happened to follow. And in December of 1915, the city of San Diego made him the offer of his life. Fill our Morena reservoir and we'll pay you $10,000. That was a fortune at the time. If no rain came, he'd get nothing. Hatfield took the bet. He built his tower. He released his chemicals on New Year's Day, 1916. And then the sky opened. It rained lightly at first, then harder. Then it became a deluge that would not quit. For days the water came down in sheets. Rivers burst their banks. Bridges washed away. Whole communities were cut off. And then the lower Otay Dam gave way. And that 40-foot wall of water tore down everything in its path on the way to the sea. Around 20 people died. The damage ran into the millions. And here is where the attribution problem became the perfect, inescapable trap. Charles Hatfield marched into City Hall to collect his $10,000, proud as could be, ready to be paid for the greatest rainmaking feat in history. But the city had done the math, and the math was a nightmare for him. If they paid Hatfield, they were legally admitting that he made the rain. And if he made the rain, then he also made the flood, which meant he was on the hook for millions in damage claims from every wrecked home and every grieving family. So the city offered him a devil's choice. We'll pay you your $10,000, but only if you accept legal responsibility for the flood. Or you can insist it was just an act of God, a natural coincidence, in which case you get nothing. He could be a rich rainmaker who owed millions, or a broke bystander who happened to be standing near a storm. He could not be both a genius and innocent. Hatfield argued and sued and fought for the better part of 20 years, and the courts kept landing on the same answer. The rain was an act of God, which meant Hatfield had nothing to do with it, which meant he was owed nothing. He never collected a single dollar. The greatest rainmaker of his age was undone by the one question this business can never answer. Did you really do it? And that is the lesson buried in the whole billion-dollar business of making it rain. This is an industry where the customers are entire nations, where the market is worth billions, where the biggest player is covering an area larger than India, and where the core product is still something no one can definitively prove was ever delivered. You're not really selling water. You're selling the feeling of control over a sky that has never once agreed to be controlled. And so the numbers tell the whole story in a single absurd figure. After nearly 80 years of science, after billions of dollars in Nobel laureates and government programs spanning 50 countries, the best estimate for how much extra rain you can actually squeeze from a willing cloud is somewhere around 10 to 15% on a good day. When the conditions are right, that's it. Billions of dollars. Chasing a maybe. Charles Hatfield died in 1958, still insisting he could do it, still keeping his formula a secret to the grave. Maybe he was a genius. Maybe he was the luckiest con man who ever lived. And the terrifying, wonderful truth is that a full century later, with all our satellites and drones and silver iodide, we still can't say for certain which one he was. That's the business. Everyone's betting on the rain, and the sky refuses to sign a receipt. So I'm curious what you make of all this. If your country was in a brutal drought and someone offered a program that might add 10% more rain, would you fund it, knowing you could never prove it worked? Tell me where you're watching from, and let me know if you'd take that bet. I read every comment. And if this changed the way you'll look at the next rain cloud that rolls over your town, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Because around here we take the strangest, most overlooked corners of the money world, and we follow the dollar all the way down. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.